Okay, Michiel, I think we're ready to start with our first table guest, I would say.
Yeah, okay. So the first guest is Navi Radjou, and I'm hoping that Navi is there. Hi, Navi, how are you?
Good, how about yourself?
Very good, thank you. Thanks for joining. So Navi is going to discuss this Reimagine part. He has been writing and talking. He will talk about the rising frugal economy, Navi, and the conscious society. Navi is a bestseller author. He wrote in 2012 Jugaad Innovation, and in 2015 you came with your book Frugal Innovation. And now the forthcoming book, I'm really dying to see it, in 2021 will be this book on conscious society, reinventing how we consume, work and live. Navi was born in Pondicherry. He enjoyed a French education. He studied in Paris and then moved to Canada and then later to the US. Navi, you describe yourself truly as a global citizen. We met about 20 years ago when you were working with Forrester Research as an analyst, you still remember. You've lived in California, you're now in New York. You're a Cambridge University fellow. You aim to ignite, as you say, people's ingenuity, compassion and wisdom. You're an innovation and leadership advisor, and really what I'm looking forward to hear from you is how to reimagine the purpose of our organizations. So, Menno.
Hi, Navi. Hey.
Hi.
Maybe I think a question about the COVID situation that we are in, because everybody wants to know the shape of the recovery, of course. So there's different types of shapes. People talk about V shapes, W shapes, or VW shape. I know you have a strong opinion about this shape of the recovery. Can you help us a little bit in explaining what will be the shape of the recovery according to you?
Sure. First of all, I'm delighted to kick off this executive summit. And as Michiel said, I had the pleasure to speak at the summit 20 years ago. So it's great to be back again. So the shape of the recovery, right? I mean, a couple of months ago, we were all hoping for a V-shaped recovery, whereby we were hoping that we'll bottom out from this crisis and come out stronger and resume growth. But I don't think that's going to happen. And even the director of the OECD, the economic think tank, ruled out clearly the V-shaped recovery. And being in the Western world, we can see that we're actually moving to a more W-shaped recovery, where we had a beginning of growth and then we see a resurgence of the pandemic now. So we are kind of plunging again in a recession and hoping that maybe next year we might resume growth. So this is called the W-shaped recovery. But what I've been studying this year is a few pioneering companies that are quietly undertaking what I call a Y-shaped recovery. So if you look at the V-shaped recovery, it's primarily focused on changing what you do, that is pivoting or adapting your business model to meet new economic demand. But these pioneering companies we'll talk about in a minute, they are focusing on, as you can see here, a Y-shaped recovery, which is focused on reinventing their core being or the raison d'etre.
Yeah, do you need to explain more about the Y shape? Because I think one of the intriguing remarks they always make is the future of work is inner work, as you call it. And this is related to the Y shape. So what's the inner work? What do you mean with inner work?
Right, and if you look at, again, the slide, right, the Y shape, it's very clear that, the idea is to say that, let's use this crisis as an opportunity to go within as a company and introspect and re-examine, as well as maybe redefine who we are, that is our core identity, our core values, why we exist, our purpose, and how we see the world. What is our perspective and what is our vision of the world? And once you have a clear understanding of who you are, why you exist, and how you see the world, then you can actually change what you do. That is, come up with a different business model or redesign your ecosystem, etc. And a great example of a company that has undertaken this Y-shaped transformation is the French sports retail company. Actually, they're a global retailer called Decathlon. They have 94,000 employees in 57 countries. And what they do is every few years, they reimagine the company. They engage all the employees in a collective brainstorming exercise to reimagine what the company should look like 10 years down the road. But then last year, they started an interesting exercise called Vision 2030, where they decided to engage not only the employees, but the larger ecosystem, thousands of the customers, sports people, policymakers, et cetera, to reimagine the future of humanity as a whole, and then figure out how Decathlon can turn this future reality, future vision into a reality.
So actually what you're saying, Navi, is that probably every company should take that 2030 vision and act upon it now. Is that, I think that's maybe a first conclusion already, Michiel.
Yes, that's exactly the way to look at it, because what happened is that while they were developing this vision, reimagining, right? I mean, this was an exercise that was supposed to start last October and end this September. But then halfway through that, COVID struck. So they actually came up with a bold decision in July this year, which is to rename their Vision 2030 as Vision 2021. And as you rightly pointed out, Minnow, the idea is to say, look, global issues like inequality, climate change, right? We can wait 10 years to address them. So we need to basically bring these, priorities closer now, which is 2021, and implement these changes quickly.
Okay. So Navi, another question for you. So in your writings and in our conversations, you have expressed it many times that you believe that organizations must leverage this crisis for fundamental change. What are the core concepts to take at heart when organizations are trying to reimagine their future?
Sure. I see there are four major concepts that are going to be quite disruptive, and some of the companies I've studied are pioneering these. I'm going to list them first and then expound each of them. The first one is B2B sharing. The second one is decentralized manufacturing or production. The third one is triple regeneration. I think that Ruth will be talking about that later. And then the fourth one is the shift from B2B or B2C to what I call B2S, which is business to society. So
Can you explain quickly all four of them?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So all four of them are super exciting because these are things that, as you remember, the previous exec summit, we were kind of envisioning them. But now, excitingly, this year, I would claim that thanks to COVID, maybe, they're becoming reality. So the first one is B2B sharing, where the same way we had in the last crisis, 2008, the emergence of the B2C sharing economy, right, with Airbnb, Uber, that enabled people like us, individuals, to share apartments and the cars. Now we will have the similar version of the sharing economy among companies. For instance, since you know very well Netherlands, there is a platform called Flow2, which enables hospitals to share equipment. So if a patient comes to hospital to do a scan, the CT scanner is busy, they can find out if there's another scanner elsewhere, another hospital, and then dispatch the patient there.
So it's making underutilized assets available in a business-to-business sharing economy.
That's exactly right. It's keeping all the assets and resources fully optimized. By the way, that could be physical assets, but even human resources, right? Like talent can be shared as well. And even intellectual property potentially, right, can be shared through marketplaces. So that's B2B sharing. The second one is the notion that, centralized supply chains with big factories are very fragile. And we see with COVID, right, where we are producing mainly in China, and that kind of centralized supply chain model is not working. So with 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and other technologies like Marcus will talk about AI and robotics, it's now possible to decentralize, distribute supply chains, and bring production closer to consumption. For instance, for the vaccines, for COVID, right, there's something called continuous manufacturing, which enables drug manufacturers now to make vaccines and drugs in a micro factory no bigger than a container. So you can, dispatch these micro factories anywhere in the world and produce vaccines locally to the local, demand. So that's the second, concept, which is a distributed supply chains or manufacturing. The third one, which Ruth will delve deeper into, is the whole notion that we need to go beyond the idea of sustainability, right? Which is about reducing carbon footprint, doing less harm to the planet, because 80% American consumers want brands to focus on regeneration, that is to bring more vitality, to people, places like communities, and the planet. So this is what we call triple regeneration, which is to intentionally create positive impact on society and the planet.
So it's about not anymore to do less harm, but to do good as a company, which is...
That's exactly right. It's about doing good and potentially being good, because it's not enough to just doing good, and you have to be good. And that brings me to the fourth exciting concept, is this notion of business to society companies. So for instance, the industrial company Siemens is moving from a B2B company where they focus on delivering value to their industrial customers to creating and delivering value for the society. So they are reinventing themselves as a B2S or business society company, where they're looking at in each of the 200 countries where they're operating, how can we leverage our assets, resources, and our ecosystem to actually co-create solutions to improve access to decent education, energy, mobility, healthcare, etc.
Okay.
So these are the four main concepts that I think are going to be quite disruptive starting this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to an audience question
Exactly.
on the basis of these concepts.
Yeah. I would like to hear from the attendees whether they believe that their business model fundamentally, because you talked about changes in business model basically, whether they think their business models fundamentally need to change, or that the business model that they have is still quite okay. But
So they should take their mobile device again.
mobile device,
go to
menti.com.
Menti.
It's
and
on the
then they can
screen.
answer
So
the
if you take your mobile device and go to Menti, use the code either, or take a picture of the QR code, you will immediately go to the relevant page. And we can see live the number of people responding and the percentage of the answer. Our business model can basically stay the same, is 42 against 56.
So this is quite interesting. I don't know, Navi, if you can see this, but so it's about almost a 50-50 split.
I would
between...
say it was almost the American election that we are looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
Blue and red.
We promised we wouldn't go to discuss the American election at all today, so thanks for bringing that up. But so you see a 50-50 split between companies that believe that they need to fundamentally change their business model and basically staying the same. Are you surprised with that answer, Navi?
I am not surprised in the sense that 2020 is a period where we are just trying to survive, right? And so it makes sense to cling to the existing business model. And actually, if you look at it, instead of looking at it as either or, it's about both. And I think maybe another question would have been like, you could have asked, is like, while you are maintaining existing business model, right? How are you creating new models? Because several companies have been studying, like Decathlon, Danone, right?
Yeah,
even Siemens, right?
sense.
Right. They are basically, this is a classic idea, right? You keep maintaining the existing model, but gradually, you're transitioning to a new model. So it won't happen overnight. But in the coming years, I'm sure that, the people who responded, they are keeping the business model, will be saying that, they have fully transitioned to a new model.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, Navi. So you have this upcoming book, Conscious Society. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about the concepts that you will describe in that book. And of course, you shared a pre-copy of that to get an idea of what you write about. Now, you're famous for your books about frugal innovation or jugaad or cheap innovation and doing more with less. So how does that relate to this new work of Conscious Society?
Sure. So jugaad is essentially improvised creativity, and John Carroll will be, giving you a demonstration of that later, I'm sure. But we saw, during this crisis, right, we say that necessity is the mother of invention, and so we have to improvise, right? As I said, all the supply chains were crippled, so we have to make do. We have to survive using the resources we have at disposal. So conscious society is exactly that: is how do we empower grassroots innovation? Empower citizens to take ownership of the destiny and leverage the inner resources like ingenuity, compassion, wisdom to co-create frugal, simple, but effective solutions for the local communities. And we saw an incredible demonstration of that in Italy, for instance, where a doctor teamed up with a maker, an entrepreneur, to convert a Decathlon scuba diving mask into a respirator, right? And then they made this design available in open source. and you can just download and 3D print a component that actually adapts the scuba diving mask into a respirator. And the 10,000 units have been downloaded, saving equal number of lives. So that's a fantastic example where citizens are becoming more conscious that they have the power now to make a change. So this idea of essentially reimagining the world is not something that happens tomorrow in a top-down way, but I think it's becoming a reality driven by these grassroots innovations.
Okay, so now we're almost already out of time, Navi, but Menno has a last question for you.
Well, it's about reimagination, Navi. It sounds great, of course. Everyone would say, yes, let's reimagine. But the tough question is, where do you start? So if there's companies here that say, yes, let's reimagine a company. So when you make it practical, what would your advice be?
Sure. I guess a bit more controversial advice would be, I guess the people listening to us are senior executives, right? Well, this is not something, you don't reimagine the company in a C-suite, right? It has to be what I call a 360-degree exercise, where essentially you as Decathlon did, right? And this is where technology can be powerful, right? There are crowdsourcing, brainstorming, virtual brainstorming technologies. Look at Zoom, right? I mean, it's incredible. These online collaboration tools can be leveraged to engage your internal stakeholders, your globally distributed workforce, as well as your suppliers, your customers, and your partners to co-envision the future. So this is not an exercise you do. It's not an elitist, exercise, right? That you do by hiring, some management consultancy, right? And then you go implement it. This has to be done in a very democratic way. And that's what we are seeing now, Basically this notion of, holocracy and the liberated enterprise, that's what it is. It's really about leadership, engaging in a humble way all the internal, external stakeholders to brainstorm and co-imagine the future and figure out how they can use internal resources and the larger ecosystem to turn the reality quickly, quickly into reality like Decathlon did.
And do you think, will it happen? I mean, this is what you can do or should do. But do you think a lot of companies will...
I'm actually working with half a dozen companies right now. And the thing is, see, they're all doing it quietly, right? And I was thinking this morning, right? This is why the answer, remember the people said half don't want to change the business model. What they don't know is in each of the industry, I can tell you, there is a competitor who is quietly doing the wide transformation. And you won't see the results until next year. They won't be public, right? But when they make it public, it's going to be highly disruptive. So that's why I would say that pretty much everyone in any industry has to start doing it, because I can say in every sector, I've identified at least one or even two companies that are quietly doing this, 360-degree reimagination exercise.
So you come with some very powerful ideas, Navi. So thanks for that for now. I think it's high time that now we ask our audience to have a debate, a discussion amongst themselves. And of course, we have been thinking about, okay, what should we ask them? So we talked about the necessity, the 4 R's, and the first one we now discussed, the reimagining in a conscious society for a purpose economy. And so what we came up with was to ask a very simple question to the audience, but that will launch a lot of debate, which is, the question is, what's the purpose of purpose? And what we have done is we are going to give them a list of 10 options, and we want them to have a debate about what are the 3 most important ones. So it's to save the planet, that's one, or to attract Gen Z, to make more profit, to stay in business, to give us direction, to satisfy the shareholder, to beat the competition, to create a better future for our children, to make a better marketing slogan, right? The purpose washing that is going on, or to make us proud. And I'm really looking forward. So they will spend now about 15 minutes with their facilitators, and then they have to come up with this top 3 out of the following 10 possibilities. And then after that 15 minutes of discussion, we will have a nano break, and then they will come back in 20 minutes from now, and I'm really interested to learn what they have been discussing. So thanks now for now, Navi, and see you back in a bit. Before we move on to our next part, I would really like to go back to the CXO panel. And so we have presented our first thoughts about reimagination. And so here are Pierre Esler, Jurgen Berends, Johan Smessars, and Jordan Bouch, or the 3 J's, as I call them. Pierre, what is your takeaway? What are the conclusions from your CXO panel?
Well, first of all, for the purpose of that panel, I've just adopted a new name, Joseph, you know, so...
Yeah, the 4 J's.
Call us the 4 J's, okay? I think we have 3 pragmatic observations and conclusions which we are keen to share. Do you want to start, Jordan?
Sure, thank you, Pierre. I think I went right to the implementation of how do you implement things that Navi was suggesting, and I went right to Agile, that if your organization is not Agile at this point, it really needs to be. With all new players coming into the market, worrying about your captive audience, you need to be able to respond quickly, and obviously we talked about COVID as well, and the ability to bring folks together, and I think that Banner Health example was a perfect example of breaking down the barriers between areas and executing quickly and delivering and continuing to deliver. So that agile cycle, not just in technology development, but around the building or around the organization should be in place.
Okay.
Very good. Jordan, you have a specific case in point, if I can say so.
Yeah, also I guess it attaches to the point made by the gentleman from Banner Health. My observation is that, and I think we've all seen this, that our organizations and our society are capable of changing tremendously under pressure in ways that we maybe have been resisting for years. In my previous life, I worked at Philips, and Philips has for decades been trying to introduce products for telemedicine and remote care, which has been very painful because there's a lot of resistance in the system to that. But with COVID causing hospitals to be places you wouldn't want to go, and they were overwhelmed, lots of healthcare moved online more or less overnight, and in ways that was very difficult to imagine for a while. In many countries, mobility levels in between the peaks were more or less back to normal, but all traffic was gone. Governments have been trying for years to get people to spread working hours so that they would not be in traffic jams, and lo and behold, in a few months we managed to achieve this, and I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. We always insisted we had to travel everywhere to see customers, and now we know that we can actually continue to kind of manage relationships with customers without necessarily being in the same room. And so I think there's many cases where we have sort of seen transformational change happen really quickly under pressure in companies, and I think that many of those gains will persist.
Uh-huh.
Very good. What about you, Johan? You are shifting the experience, aren't you?
Yeah, what I think is that a lot of what we are now discussing has already been there somewhere under the surface before. And we were looking at collecting feedback from customers and stakeholders and making the world more digital and all that. And now all of a sudden it becomes reality. But what happens now as a bit of a shock, that it looks as if we forgot a very important category of that, is the employees. And I've seen it last year that the employee experience now is suddenly changing. There was a bit, especially from an IT perspective, the IT we were offering was very much oriented towards customer needs and so on. And bringing the employee at level is something that was missing. And I see now with the COVID crisis, the collaboration tooling and all that, it becomes very important. And I think it's one of the most important investments IT departments should do now, is bring the employees at level and get the experience back.
All right. So
let me conclude with one observation, is that every organization I've been discussing with lately, they all have been extremely proud of what they did during COVID and the speed at which the reactions happened. And it's a universal feeling. And I would express kind of a fear, which might also be universal, is that if and when the COVID threat recedes, we might be tempted not to forget how well we behaved during COVID. And therefore, we should have an inventory of what was changed under COVID pressures and maybe make sure that these changes are not reverted carelessly.
Okay, very good. Thank you for these advices and conclusions and probably some action points on the strategic agenda. I don't know if we still have Navi here. So maybe, Navi, you want to say a couple things about this response to your story? Hi, Navi.
Oh, hi. Yes, first of all, I was thrilled to be, listening to everything. Two quick observations because I don't want to monopolize time. I think the answers were very, revealing, right? Because indeed, it's important that the purpose is not something abstract, but on a psychological level gives, confidence, direction, and hope for people. I think that one was listed at the top. So that every morning when they wake up, right, these employees feel proud to work for a company that is, positively impacting the world. The second thing I would say is that actually, since Pierre, mentioned that, I actually have a homework for your clients, and maybe this is something that, we can work together with Sogeti. There's a concept called the post-vitam. When there's a concept called post-mortem, right? When something goes wrong, you go back and analyze what went wrong and derive lessons, things you don't want to repeat again, right? Mistakes to learn from. The post-vitam, the word vitam comes from the Latin life, regeneration, right? Again. So as Pierre beautifully said, it's about cataloging, documenting what are the things you did during this crisis that brought out the aliveness in your employees. So this why transformation, I'm sure that in all your client organizations, it happened. These micro why transformation took place. So before it's too late, you go back to normal. It will be interesting to do this post, vitam exercise, and maybe Sogeti can provide you the right technology to document these and create maybe a knowledge sharing platform to inspire each other and basically again, right, realize that this purpose you already have it and you demonstrated that in large scale, but maybe on a short time frame during this crisis.
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting point that you and Pierre made, that we have to prevent from after the crisis going back to complacency, but really make an inventory of what the good energy and creativity and momentum actually was produced by the crisis, and keep on holding on to that also after the crisis. So thank you very much, Navi, for your contribution, and thanks for the CXO panel for their critical but also very valuable tips.